Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, College Roommate Finds His Misdeed Exposed to All. When I went off to college, my freshman year roommate was that guy everyone tells horror stories about. This story took place after I'd already put up with a lot of misery from him, but before he'd really pissed me off. Just to be fair to everyone, this was quite a while ago. I'm not going to give an exact date, but here are the say how old you are without saying how old you are clues. AOL was carpet bombing everyone's mail with CD-ROMs trying to get you to use their services. Digital cameras existed, but even the cheapest ones were expensive, and we were all some shade of poor college student, so we were using film cameras, usually of the disposable variety. This will be relevant later. Anyhow, I was in a double occupancy room on a floor with about 16 such rooms. Other than my roommate and one or two others, the other 35-ish people on my floor of our dorm were great. People were friendly, planned social events large and small together, and were generally pleasant to be around. Rumi, as he shall henceforth be known, wanted to be the bad boy. He was obsessed with the movie Fight Club. He started a fight club. He drank, underage, and smoked, so gross, in our room. He played loud music in the room while I was sleeping. He'd steal stuff from others, and was just generally an annoyance for the rest of us. Anyhow, after returning from a trip, I had left a disposable camera with a couple of shots left sitting on my desk, wound and ready to take a picture at a moment's notice. When I came back from classes that day, I was putting it away and realized that it was no longer wound. Someone had taken a picture. Rumi and I had some history by now, so I instantly knew what had happened. Whatever, I used the last picture or two, then took it in to get it developed. If you are reading this and expecting pictures of anything other than Rumi's ass, I have a few somewhat contradictory thoughts for you. You are a sweet, sweet summer child. Just so you know, I'm talking about Rumi's bottom, not his donkey. Don't change. If it's not already too late, you should get off the internet and enjoy the last gasps of your innocence before you realize that this is about as benign as you're going to find here. It only took a decade or so to be able to laugh about all my trouble with Rumi. Learning to live away from home is a great experience. Sorry, back to the story now. I was a little irritated because at this time you paid per picture developed, and so I'd managed to exchange actual cash money for 2 pictures of Rumi with his ass hanging out along with the rest of the pictures on that roll of film. So, there I was, sitting at my desk thinking about revenge, and about half a second of thought let me hit upon the obvious, perfect, glorious solution. Every floor on our dorm, which was quite large, had a bulletin board that was literally the first thing you'd see when getting off the elevators at our floor. Each floor could decide how they wanted to decorate their own board. Some floors had boring stuff like announcements, some had paintings, but we had decided that we were going to post pictures of us doing fun things. Anyhow, these 4 feet by 8 foot boards were entirely covered with an ever-changing photo collage. Rumi was way too cool to pay any attention to this or contribute in any way, so I just worked both copies of his moonshot into the collage. It was perfect. It was just a sea of faces, so one more pasty oval didn't stand out in the least. The best part was that Rumi was clearly identifiable in the picture. The rest of the people on my floor noticed pretty much instantly. Decades later, I can perfectly recall one of my floormates grinning and saying, "That's a lot of skin," every time I think of this story. Within a day or two, everyone on the floor, including our RA, were laughing about it. We all were just waiting to see how long it would last. But Rumi's bridges had all been long burned at this point, so there wasn't really anyone that was going to tell him about it. It was weeks before he found out. He continued to be the bane of my existence, but those are stories for another day, and he never messed with my cameras again. Epilogue, I don't think I ever spoke to or laid eyes on Rumi in person after that year, but every 5 or 10 years I go trolling through the interwebs to see if I can find him. For a while, I was expecting to find him in court records. To his credit, he appears to have settled down, has a good job and a family. So, Rumi, if you're reading this, nice job turning things around. Good luck. The last story is titled, My Father Sued My Sister for My Mother's House. A bit of backstory, my parents got divorced 33 years ago. Oh, and at the time, they both owned several houses. When they separated their assets, my mother got the home she lives in now, and my father got the home he lives in now, but he tried to still take the home she lives in by not paying the mortgage payments and not telling her he hadn't paid the mortgage. Had it not been for my godfather loaning my mom the money to get the payments up to date, my father would have put my mother and his 3 kids out on the street. Fast forward 28 years later. My father owned his own business, and he was looking for someone to buy it, and so my sister offered to buy it from him. They agreed on price and signed the contract. Now here's the rub. The business was a business that was losing customers because it's a dying industry, and my father never told my sister that. My sister is one of the hardest workers I know, and she put everything she had into the business, and nothing she was doing was working. And that wasn't because she wasn't doing the right thing, it was because the business in and of itself was a dying medium for that industry. During all this, after my father had finally retired, they got into an argument about a financial matter in dealing with the company, and my father was completely disrespectful in the way he handled it towards my sister, and he did that in front of her employees. My sister stopped talking to him at that point. Over the next couple of months, despite my sister's extensive hard work, the company went under, and my sister had to close the business after it had been open for 38 years. My sister was devastated by this because not only did she put all her hard work, her blood, sweat, and tears into it, but she also put all her financial resources, which meant that she was financially devastated as well. My father was really upset because the company that he had created and nurtured over 38 years had been closed through what he saw as no fault of his own. Clearly, because the business closed, my sister could not continue to pay my dad's payments she was paying him for his business. Then she found out that the business had already been dying. In fact, my father had taken money out of his own account to put into the business because he knew it was dying when he sold it to her. He literally scammed his own daughter in the sale, for lack of a better way of saying it. Because she stopped paying him, he decided that he was going to sue her in court with a judge and everything. Now for context, a few years before all of this happened, my mom had gotten sick and gone to the hospital, and at the time I lived across the country and my brother lived across the country, and the only one who lived in the same state was my sister. My mother was afraid that if something happened to her, we wouldn't get the house, so she put the house in my sister's name since my sister lived the closest. Oh, the house was still in my mother's name as well, but my sister's name was added to it. After my mom got out of the hospital, she never got around to changing it. So, when my father started threatening to sue, my sister went through her assets and realized that my mother's house was still in her name and switched it back over to just my mother's name. In our state, however, we have a law that if you think someone fraudulently switches an asset out of their name in order to avoid being sued for it, you can sue them for that asset still, and it's up to them to prove that it wasn't fraudulently transferred. So, when my father decided to sue my sister, he added my mother's house onto the lawsuit as one of the things he wanted. He didn't sue my sister for the house that she owns in her name with her husband in a whole nother city. He sued her for a house she hasn't lived in over 25 years, and a house that she has not put any money into ever in her life. Now, when he first filed the suit, I thought he was just trying to force my sister to talk to him, because I couldn't imagine any parent, let alone my parents, suing their child, but he went through with it. He initially told me that he was suing for my mother's house because the lawyer told him he had to sue for all her assets, and since my mother's house had been in her name, he had to sue for that as well as her house. But then I found out he wasn't suing her for her house, he was suing her only for my mother's house. He's still mad that he didn't get my mother's house 33 years ago when they got a divorce. So mad that he lost in that case that he decided to go after her house the first chance he got. And this was it 33 years later. The even more messed up thing is that when I found out he was going after my mother's house, I myself told him, if you go through with this lawsuit and you win my mother's house and you take her house away from her, I will never forgive you. I will never talk to you again. You will lose me, and losing me will also mean you lose your grandchild, your only grandchild, so you need to think about whether or not this is worth it to you. And he still went through with it. He still went through with it, knowing that he would not only lose my sister, but me as well. He filed this lawsuit 5 years ago, and they just got through going to court. So for the last 5 years, he's forced his daughter, his princess, his baby girl, to suffer under the weight of knowing that her father, A, screwed her over, B, was putting money before her, and C, apparently felt no real remorse or sadness to hurting his own child, emotionally, mentally, and financially. The worst part is, he didn't just teach her that, he taught all 3 of his kids with this one act. He did all of this because he thinks that even though he got everything in the divorce, with the exception of primary custody of us kids and that one house, that he is entitled to take my mom's house after 33 years of her living there, putting all of her time and energy into making it a home for us kids, and putting her own money into improving it, and her paying off the mortgage on her own as a single mother while raising 3 teenage children on what would be considered poverty wages today. We grew up in the late 80s and early 90s. He hasn't put a dime into that property since 1988, and yet he somehow feels like he's entitled to take it away from my mother without even caring about the damage it would do to his own children. And you know how some people have some idea in their head that it's okay to mistreat your kid if they're not your biological kids, like a stepchild or foster child or an adoptive child? Which I think is disgusting in its own right, but there are people out there who actually believe that. So for those out there who actually believe that it's okay to mistreat your child if they're not your biological child, I say this. It's not like we're like his stepchildren or foster children or children he adopted or any other random crazy-ass excuse that some random person tries to use to justify their own abuse of their children. We're his biological flesh and blood, and there's no denying it because we look very similar to him and his family. I just can't stop thinking, what kind of sick duck sues their own kid? Update, I commented on this down below, but I thought I'd add this update for those who asked. A lot of people here have said that my sister needed to do her due diligence in examining the business. My sister did examine all the business records for the last 10 years, and she had a lawyer go over the contract with a fine-tooth comb. It wasn't a matter of her not doing her due diligence. It was a matter of the business records that she was given were very different from the business records that held the actual information necessary. For lack of a better way to say it, he cooked the books. And for those wondering the outcome, she did file a countersuit for him selling her a business that was unviable. She was able to prove in court that the business was failing before he sold it to her, and that the equipment he sold her was equipment that he had bought 20 years ago and was no longer usable when it came to the technology of today. Also, I was already pretty sure that no jury worth their salt would give him a house that my sister never put a dime in and hadn't lived in for over 25 years, especially when he wasn't going after any of her other assets. I was right. When they got to court, my sister told the judge and the jury that she didn't want anything from him in her countersuit. She didn't want money. She didn't want anything from him but for this to be over. He told the court and the jury, but he just wanted my mother's house in lieu of the $300,000 my sister owed him for the business. My father lost his lawsuit. My sister won her lawsuit and was given $0, as that's what she was asking for. So, he permanently lost one daughter, and the other one, myself, is seriously questioning whether I want to talk to him ever again. Over the last 10 years, I've maintained a relationship with my father, not because it's what he wanted, but because it's what I wanted. Now I just don't know if that's something I want anymore. I don't know if I want to be around the kind of person that could sue his own child. Update 2. First, I want to thank everybody for their comments and their concerns, regardless of whether I agreed with them. You take time out of your day to give me your opinion, and that is truly appreciated. For those who were wondering, I did try to have a relationship with my father to some extent again after telling him exactly how I felt about what he did and making it clear to him that those were my feelings, and they weren't going to change. Unfortunately, my father is my father, and I ended up not being able to put aside what he had done from who he is, because at the end of the day, what he had done is directly a result of who he is. So, I've stopped talking to him for the time being. Ironically, the thing that got me there was an argument over lettuce. Basically, he wanted to give me lettuce that I would never use, and I repeatedly told him I would never use it, but he kept insisting that I come over and get it. But at the end of the day, I basically realized that at my emotional state right now, even if I wanted to have a relationship with him, I can't because I'm too angry, hurt, and disgusted by what he did. I'm a person who used to believe that family was everything, and I don't anymore because of his actions, and that is devastating to me. So I just believe that right now, I'm better off not talking to him. I want to thank you again for your kind words and your caring concern. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.